How should we rebrand midlife or getting older?
Who do we see when we look in the mirror? The answer isn't useful if it's, I'm a shell of my former self. Instead, the answer could be, I have a chance to be the best version of me for someone else today. What an opportunity. And that's a choice. That's the branding that I think we have to bring. And I think you've done enormously positive work by helping people realize that you don't have to apologize for the fact that you're doing a new thing at 50. In fact, you probably should.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis podcast with Chip Conley.
Welcome to the Midlife Chrysalis and my episode with Seth Godin. Seth has been a friend of mine for 43 years. We were in business school together as the two youngest people in our Stanford business school class. We wrote a book together, both of our first books, in our second year of business school. He's a smart as can be kind of marketing guru. And so I asked him about branding around midlife and aging and getting older. And he had some interesting comments there. But most importantly, that Seth got personal in this episode and also helped us to understand at the end of the episode, his origin story. I think you're going to enjoy this one. We have 43 years of history together.
The feeling is mutual, but it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't even feel like 43 months.
So just to give some background, Seth and I were the two youngest people in our Stanford business school class. He was 22 when he joined. I was 21 for about a month and a half, which is very young. Today it's rare to see that, but even back then in 1982, when we went to business school, it was really unusual. And we joined and we both had a chip on our shoulder. Excuse the pun, that, we're a year or two younger than a lot of the people, and they treated us as if we were juveniles. Although they sort of liked me because I had gone to Stanford undergrad and I could get dates for a lot of the guys with undergrads. But Seth, what did it feel like to you when we were the youngest people in our class?
This is worth decoding because there's some universal lessons. First of all, I think Stanford makes an error when they don't let people in when they're still impressionable. The reason I had a chip on my shoulder was because everyone I encountered needed to justify the way that they had wasted 2 years of their life doing clerk work at an investment bank. If the only reason they had done it was to get into business school and I hadn't had to do that, then there must be something wrong with me. And I don't blame them for this. But it was a huge growth opportunity for me to realize that being judged by other people might not be based on reality.
Yeah, I also think both of us learned during our 2 years there that we're entrepreneurs and we don't love being in the classroom. And so I think it was you who recommended that in our second year, we write a book together and get credit for writing a book. And I think, as if I recall it properly, you said, listen, this is the only time we can go out and talk to what I would now call modern elders, because we're not competition. They want to probably hire us, and we can ask them about their business rules of thumb. And that was the name of that book that we wrote together, which didn't have a lot of writing in it. It just has a bunch of rules of thumb from people out there in the business world.
And it was our first book, and you've gone on to write many bestsellers, as have I. But the poignant irony of the book is that it came out the same day as Vanna White's autobiography. And Jim Frost was our editor, and Jim had a crush on Vanna. And so he spent all his time on Vanna's book and none on ours.
That is true. Our book didn't go very far, but it did capture, our... First of all, it allowed us to talk to a lot of interesting people. I don't remember if we actually talked to J. Conrad Levinson, but I want to explore for a moment this idea of intergenerational collaboration and wisdom transfer. And I do remember back then that you were sort of enthralled with Mr. Levinson, J. Conrad Levinson. Tell us a little bit about why he was a bit of a modern elder for you. What was it that you liked about him as a role model?
Well, may he rest in peace. He became a good friend over the years. Yes, I did get to speak to him, and then I persuaded him to turn his guerrilla marketing book into a series, and I wrote 3 or 4 of them. So Jay was 30 years older. I got him his first computer, got him on AOL, where he became a texting sext addict, which is a weird side story.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yes, it took him 3 years to get out of that hole.
Wow.
We taught each other things. I taught him a little bit about broadening his message and understanding the power of a brand. And he taught me a lot about walking through the world on lighter feet. He found joy in every single thing we did. His ideas, some of them really stand the test of time, but his attitude more than anything does. That we only get to do this once. So why the hell not enjoy it?
My impression, and this is again, faulty memory from 40 years ago, was that one of the things you liked about him is he had a bunch of side things always happening. He had this thing and he had that thing and he had that book thing, and it was sort of what we now call a portfolio life. But tell me a little bit more about that. Why you admired that, especially as you started looking at your career.
It's hard to remember, but the standard of the day was you got a job at the placement office and you stayed at that job until you were dead. And we felt like the most important choice we were going to make is, should we go to Bain or McKinsey? We felt like this single moment was going to define us. And there are some people from our class who are still in their first job, but almost none. When you talk to someone today as a modern elder who's 20, they would think you were insane if you suggested to them that they were going to stick with one job. I just read yesterday, creativity, the word creativity only was put in the dictionary 100 years ago. And it wasn't used by people to say, I'm creative or I do creative work. That's brand new. It was invented by the Department of Defense as a way to persuade a wide swath of elites to go to post-factory work and do what they were told, but to have self-esteem because they could see themselves as creative. And it sowed the seeds for people realizing they have agency and realizing that that means you are not your organization, you are not your job. And if a better wave comes along, you should switch waves.
You have had a portfolio life. In fact, I have a couple of your books back here. Let's angle over there. These are these big
18
books.
18 pounds.
These are these big, they're like barbells. And yes, one of them is called This Might Work. The other one is called What Does It Sound Like When You Change Your Mind? How many books have you had your fingerprints on? Whether you wrote them or you published them. I mean, we're over 100 books at this point, aren't we?
Over 150.
Over 150.
And yeah, I was talking to my friend Toby Huss, who's a character actor. And he likes to say he's been fired 178 times because there's 178 shows he's not on anymore. And proud of it. I've launched 150 plus books and not one of them has been the best-selling book of all time, but successful enough that I get to play again. And that is my whole mantra. Is it generous? Is it generative? And will I get to play again, win or lose?
In your 40s, many of your books, some of my favorites of yours came from your 40s. Some of them including Purple Cow, which I was lucky enough to be in, Free Prize Inside, All Marketers Are Liars, The Dip, Tribes, and Lynchpin. In your 50s, some of the books you came out with they showed the evidence of maturity and wisdom and maybe giving back, especially the Carbon Almanac, which we'll come back to. So I want to start just by talking about The Dip as a book and as a concept, because this podcast is, the Midlife Chrysalis. It's generally seen in the popular lexicon as the alternative to the midlife crisis, which is the number one. Whoever the branding agency who came up with midlife crisis got it right, because nobody in the world has not heard of that phrase. And yet what we have seen at MEA, at the Modern Elder Academy, is that there's so many people who hit that downslide, whether it's in the 40s or early 50s, and then things get better. The U-curve of happiness research, in fact, shows that. So tell us a little bit about the philosophy of the dip, and then I want to just then explore a little bit more with Seth Godin about dips that you've gone through and how you have eaten your own dog food to understand how to get through the other side of this dip.
Okay, I don't want to be too doctrinaire. I don't want to let my definition get in the way of the excellent point you're trying to make. But the dip, which is only a 96-page book, is about one and only one thing, which is that, and I wrote this a really long time ago, so try to remember it in a world before Facebook and YouTube.
It came out when you were 42 or 43 years old, something like that.
Yeah, so it's 20 years ago. There's a huge prize for being the best in the world that the number one match on Google gets 100 times more clicks than the eighth one. If you're in the short head, if you're seen as the winner in whatever category you pick, the benefits are enormous. And we are raised from a young age not to quit. We are raised from a young age to believe we're supposed to stick it out. And yet, most people don't wear tutus to work, and they're not still taking karate lessons. So something happened when we were a kid that we did, and then we quit it. And my argument is that there is a place in between the excitement and joy of starting a project and coming out on the other side as somebody who wins in your category. And that spot, that trough, is called the dip. It's difficult. It's there on purpose to make you quit, because if everyone kept going, there wouldn't be someone who's left in the small little category. So lots and lots of people start a startup, but almost nobody gets to the other side. Lots and lots of people go to the gym in January, but almost nobody has six-pack abs. My argument is, don't quit in the dip. Either quit before you start. See the dip and say, I'm not up for that. And I've done that many, many times. Or when you're in the dip, congratulate yourself for realizing you're in the dip and stick it out, because it's on the other side. So don't go to medical school and then quit during organic chemistry. Organic chemistry exists to get you to quit. Know that that's why it's there. It's not exactly the same as the midlife thing you're talking about, but it rhymes. And the reason that it rhymes is because we evolved to die right when the midlife crisis starts. That there's no evolutionary benefit to being a great-grandfather. That when you hit 45, your work here is done. We don't need you anymore. And it's only very recently that this second act has even been possible. And you are absolutely correct that if we can change our thinking upstairs, it can become this extraordinary opportunity. But if we buy in to the fact that the only people who are happy are 30 years old and on their key ascendancy, then we're going to be sad because we're not 30 years old anymore. And I think you've done enormously positive work by helping people realize that you don't have to apologize for the fact that you're doing a new thing at 50. In fact, you probably should.
How has this helped you? How's the dip philosophy helped you in looking at the various commitments you've made or commitments you're considering making over the course of the last 30 years or so? I mean, you've had a number of businesses. So give us a personal example of one that fits this philosophy.
Well, I'll give you two that sit right next to each other. They're very similar with different outcomes. The first one is I invented email marketing and built one of the first internet companies. And there was a 2-year period when we were within a week of bankruptcy. There was a 2-year period where every single day was impossibly difficult. But I saw a path, and I believed enough in my understanding of the system that I could push through that dip. And then 10 years later, I invented one of the first social networks called Squidoo. And there were only 9 of us, and we were the 40th biggest website in the US. One day, without warning or explanation, Google turned us off. And we went from number 40 to number 2 million. And I knew that it might be possible if I put 5 years of my life into it and raised some money to get through that dip. And I thought about what that would cost me. And I said, I don't even want to start. So when we still had money in the bank, when no one was stressed out of their mind, when we hadn't broken promises to the world, we just said, okay, we're done. And many of my peers have looked at that, and I've done things like that 3 times, have looked at me and said, well, you're not much of a player. That was pretty weak. And I said, no, it wasn't. I got 5 years of my life back. And I got to go do the next thing that never would have happened if I had been slogging through a dip that I didn't care that much about.
I went through that dip in my late 40s with Joie de Vivre, my boutique hotel company. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And we were going through the Great Recession. And I thought I'd be running that company when I was 80 years old. I sort of started it and grew it with no intention of having a liquidity event. But I really felt at that point, I had an NDE, a near-death experience, and went to the other side due to an allergic reaction to an antibiotic. And that was my opportunity to look at my life and say, wow, I have never thought of opportunity cost in the context of my life. When you're an entrepreneur, you don't know your limits until you've surpassed them. and you go out and try these things, and you don't realize what you're missing along the way until people tell you. And then you sort of feel like, well, they don't understand. I'm living my calling. I'm not a workaholic. I'm living my calling. This is the thing I'm supposed to be doing. And, like get on the bandwagon. But then that opportunity cost, I really appreciate. I think that's a thing that we maybe even get smarter about as we get older. This idea of the opportunity cost. Your choice with Squidoo 20 years ago or so to say, okay, I'm not going to actually put 5 years of my life into that because I know what I'll be missing if I do that. Similarly, for me, I ultimately sold Joie de Vivre at the bottom of the market. It was not the best decision from a financial perspective, but from a lifestyle perspective, it was absolutely the best decision. And frankly, if I hadn't done that, the Airbnb, founders would never have come to me and said, Chip, you sold your company. What the hell you're doing? You're here in San Francisco. We don't know what we're doing, and we need a modern elder here to help us. So that opportunity would not have arisen.
And you just touched on something. And your honesty in telling this story is really generous because I think it helps people understand that decisions aren't based on return on equity for the investors. They're based on our personal soul, our investment in self and what's possible. But you talked about making a decision. Annie Duke taught me something really important. Annie Duke used to be a world champion of poker. She asks groups of people, have you made a really good decision in the last year? And everyone says, oh yeah, I made a good decision. And then she says, did it turn out well? And everyone says, yeah, it was great, blah, blah, blah. And she said, these are unrelated. If you buy a lottery ticket and you win the lottery, you made a bad decision and got lucky because buying a lottery ticket is stupid. And what happens after you make a good decision is out of your control. A good decision simply means based on who I am now, what I see now, what is important to me now, what are the best paths available to me now? And if it works out, great. If it doesn't work out, great. But you still made a good decision. So the fact that you didn't make 10x on what you made on your hotel is irrelevant. Based on who you were and what you saw, you made exactly the right decision.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially in midlife around 50, get really nervous that based upon the ageism we have in our culture, depending upon the industry that they're in, if they're in the marketing or advertising industry, like, whoa, it's like that's a young person's sport. Same with technology. And there's a sense like, geez, if I make myself available out there in the world at that time, nobody will want me. But, this is why the most flourishing entrepreneurs and the greatest number of entrepreneurs tend to be after age 50. Partly because they're going to say, you know what, to hell with the marketplace, to hell with ageism. I have built some wisdom along the way, and I'm going to go start a business. And a lot of those people are attracted to you, Seth, just because of your message and how you've constantly remade yourself and shown that at any age you can start a business. So thank you. Thank you for being that person.
You're kind. The thing about most of the people who are not youngsters who start a business have a sense of reality about market scale. A good business is not a business that everyone is a customer of. That's not where the prize is. The prize is, are you serving people who want to be served in a way that's resilient enough that you get to do it again tomorrow? And there has never been a better moment than right this minute, given the tools that are available, to find the people. You don't need a lot of them, to find the people who need you and want you. I wrote about a woman who started a cruise line for lesbians. And she didn't have to buy a boat.
Olivia. Yep.
Olivia. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so she didn't have to buy a boat. She just had to organize enough people that she could charter a boat whenever she wanted to. Is that going to ever have 5 million customers? Of course not. It doesn't matter. She's serving the people she wants to serve in a way she wants to serve them and delivering enormous value to them. And that's so much better than compromising all your morals to become, a billionaire running some social network that you're not proud of. Why would you want to do that? Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should.
So you were talking about Annie a moment ago and the question about decision making. One of the questions I like to ask people is, do you make better decisions now than you did 10 or 20 years ago? And, in a big ballroom of people, 95% of the people raise their hands. And so then I say, well, why? And they say, I don't know. And it's like, well, okay, maybe you've built some wisdom. Your painful life lessons are the raw material for your future wisdom. What is it that would you say for you, Seth, is common sense for you today that was not common sense for you 25 or 30 years ago?
The biggest hard won thing is not being in high school anymore.
I know what you're saying, but explain.
Well, high school leaves scars. No one really loved high school, but I particularly did not like high school. So I don't read my Amazon reviews because I'm never going to write that book again anyway. And hearing that someone hated it just tells me something about them. It doesn't tell me something about me. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, and there were like 15 fancy people like you and me backstage, each about to go on stage. And the amount of nervousness in the room was extreme, but there were only 600 people in the audience. It wasn't being recorded. It was fun. It was just delightful. And people wanted to grab you with that negative energy because it loves company. And instead I was like, oh, there was one other person who wasn't feeling the high school thing. And she and I just chatted. It was great. But in the old days, I would have been sucked into it like nothing. And so making a decision based on what masked anonymous people over there are going to think, that's a bad idea.
Well, also, I think getting to a place where you don't really give an F, you don't give a fuck about what other people think about you, nor do you want to be reactive. You know, Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning and famously said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. When we're younger, we're a pinball in a pinball machine. There's no space between stimulus and response. Someone's the big man on campus or the bully, and he treats me that way, and I'm going to react. And I think this is part of the reason why people don't like going to reunions all that much until they get to an age later in their life where they don't give an F what anybody thinks of them, right? I don't see you at our business school reunions, Seth.
Well, I didn't even go to our business school graduation, but I have work to do because I still really care. I just do the work to insulate myself. I was walking down Broadway in the 70s in New York City, and there's a little tiny playground. And as I'm walking by, I hear this 7-year-old jeering some kid, calling him names, making fun of him. And as I walk past the playground, I realized it's me. He's making fun of me. I got to tell you, I still felt bad. I felt bad that a 7-year-old strange kid is making fun of me as I'm walking down the street because I don't know how to not care, but I do know how to insulate myself.
Along the way, would you say that you had a midlife crisis or a chrysalis?
Yeah, I had more than one. Well, I think that the growth was not making the feelings go away over the times. It's just acknowledging the feelings and not turning it into something that lasts and lasts. So when I sold my company, it was 2000.
You sold to Yahoo.
Sold to Yahoo. I lost the 80 plus people who I had been spending all my days with, many of whom were upset that I'd broken up the family. I had to move, which should have been exciting and really wasn't. And my mom was sick all at the same time. And I went from the thrill of keeping this very fragile thing going for a decade to smashing it to the wall. And that crisis lasted 9 months. And it ended with me sitting in a 3,000 square foot empty office with my dog, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And I will never forget Malcolm Gladwell. I'm very grateful. He mailed me the galley of A Tipping Point. No one knew who Malcolm was. I don't know how he knew to mail it to me. And he asked if I would blurb it. And I read his book and realized that in my head, I had been thinking, even though I had just been sitting in a funk. And I sent him a blurb. And then, I'm not exaggerating, 20 days later, Unleashing the Idea Virus was finished. I wrote the entire book in 20 days. And it wasn't based on his book, but it rhymed. And my book was going to come out 6 months before The Tipping Point. So I felt bad about that. So I sent it to Malcolm and I said, if you think this is stealing from your book, I'm not going to publish it. And P.S., would you write the foreword? And he wrote, go for it. And he wrote a foreword for me. And that got me back onto the cycle that I wanted to be on of, I'm an author. I don't have a giant team and I can go at this new pace. But that feeling of it's over and I don't know where I'm going, it's easy to marinate in that. And it's easy to imagine your greatest hits album and realize there's never going to be another song on it.
Well, and also that you were about 40 years old then. And so you had two kids. Is that right? You had two kids and you're thinking about college and you're thinking about, and also probably feeling a little bit like a little scarred from being the guy piecing together the, cash flow to keep the business alive and awake with all these employees who you loved. There was probably some part of you that just said, oh, I can't do that anymore. Although you did a few years later, but although that was not nearly as large of a group. So you learned some lessons along the way. And my sense is that since that time, you have appreciated the freedom of being, a free range person who can just write books and give speeches and you don't have the full armor of a big company you have to, take care of.
Yeah, I don't think it is completely true that I appreciate the freedom, but it doesn't come for free. And this is the discipline. I'm an insanely disciplined person. I try not to be rigid, but there's certainly so many things in my life where I am disciplined. And the discipline, so 5 years ago, I said, I'm not flying for work anymore. And I haven't been on a plane once in 5 years for work. Because once I start compromising and have to reconsider, then I got to reconsider it. So what I try to do is not focus on what these rules cost me. I try to focus on what these rules get me. So Murray, the pup, and I walked for 10 miles today. What a treat. What a privilege. I wouldn't get to do that if I was also doing this and doing this and doing the other thing. But I don't feel like I'm going slow. I just feel like I push myself to go deeper instead of cycling faster.
Yeah. No, I think as we get older, the idea of moving from accumulation to editing and getting very clear on what are the filters in your life in terms of people, places, things, and the way you curate your lifestyle. If you're fortunate enough and privileged enough to be able to do that, in your 50s, Seth, you created, if I'm not mistaken, it was your 50s, 55 years old, I think, Alt MBA, the Akimbo organization or podcast, and you then also created the Carbon Almanac. And so it felt like in some ways, as you moved from in your 40s into your 50s, and you did a lot of other things too, but there was a little bit of a shift into what Eric Erikson, the developmental psychologist, would call generativity, the idea of generating things for the sake of future generations. Does that sound accurate to you?
Part of it is. I've been teaching and coaching my whole life, and my rule was don't get paid for it and don't do it in public, because I wanted a purity to it. I didn't want there to be any ulterior motive. And when the chance to do Alt MBA came along, and then the chance to do the Carbon Almanac, I realized I had built an asset. And if I'm going to continue to hide from the public these sorts of things, I would be depriving people of something that I thought they could benefit from. So the Carbon Almanac was 2 years of full-time work as a volunteer, 1,900 co-authors. We built something really important. And if I'd gotten paid for it, or if I claimed I did the whole thing myself, it wouldn't have worked. It was, oh, Seth Godin is inviting me to be part of something. You've heard of me, so therefore you might be more likely to say yes than if I was just anonymous. And so I was trying to use the leverage in a way that could still preserve the freedom that I value so much, but could leave behind something useful. Another one of my principles, though, is public is a very big number. 6 billion, 4 billion people with an internet connection. You're never going to reach all those people. So don't compromise what you stand for another zero worth of attention. I've tried to maintain that. I don't seek new readers. I try to do better work for the readers I already have.
And what was it about the Carbon Almanac, beyond the obvious climate change, that gave you the motivation to devote 2 years of your life to that? Was obviously it was the essential nature of getting the message out, but to do it in the form you did, which was in an exceptionally collaborative form that was, like crowdsourcing. It was really crowdsourcing. And explain a little bit more about how that worked.
Okay, so some people might be on audio, but if you have a video, it looks like this. 97,000 words, footnoted, indexed, illustrated, not one error. And we did the whole thing in 5 months. Everyone involved didn't get paid. The idea was, I realized I blogged 25 years ago about climate, and then I had stopped because obviously my blog post didn't solve the problem. So what's the what am I supposed to do? The reason I stopped is I felt stupid. I felt underinformed. I was worried that if I talked about it, I would say something that completely undermined anything I was trying to accomplish. So I wanted there to be something like this. I've made almanacs in the past, so I know how to make an almanac, but I thought if I just do this on my own, I will be modeling precisely the wrong behavior. Because my thesis is community action is the only solution to the problem. Community action is what happens when people come together with structure to produce value. So let me model that. And that whole decision took 36 hours. But then once I decided, the discipline thing shifted. I wasn't going to walk away from it. In those 36 hours, I decided how I was going to spend the next 2 years of my life.
What skills did you have in your late 50s that you might not have had in your late 30s to be able to pull off that kind of collaboration effort?
The biggest skill is super simple, which is I knew that if I was just looking for assistants who would do what I told them to do, the project might happen, but it wouldn't be very good. And instead, I made the commitment to witness, to structure, to support, but not to tell anybody what to do. What I learned is how to leave space for other people, not for me to tell them what to do.
So, Seth, there are a lot of words associated with getting older, midlife, senior, old, elder, modern elder, aging. You're amazing at being creative and branding. How should we rebrand midlife or getting older? Because we have really awful language to describe this era of life. And it's, I think because we have awful language, we also have an awful perspective as we get older around this era of life. What are your thoughts on that?
I was lucky enough to know both of my grandfathers. And when they were my age, they were old. They were just old. All we've done is inserted 20 years into people's lives. And those 20 years are the thing you're trying to give a name to, right? That those are 20 years that just did not exist 40 years ago. And I don't think the answer is branding it in a way that young people will wake up and say, oh, that's a whole new thing. I think it's more about how do we help people find the mindfulness and the patience to acknowledge that there aren't 2.5 things, kid, young adult, old, but there's this other thing now. And how do we talk to ourselves about it? Not how do we talk to other people about it? Who do we see when we look in the mirror? For me, it was particularly poignant. My dad got sick shortly after we were in business school together. In solidarity, I shaved my head. And he and I looked really similar. We were once traveling together, and a woman in an airport, a stranger, walks up to us and says, "Are you guys in some sort of a cult?" The last few years of his life, he had dementia. And when I look in the mirror, I see him because I looked like him. And there's no question that there are words I can't find anymore. There are attention cycles I can't do anymore. And if I'm not careful, I'll just decide I'm old. I know I am never going to downhill ski again. I know that I am not somebody you can take to a disco who's going to have fun.
I don't know if you're ever a person I could take to a disco to have fun. I could take you to a vegan restaurant.
There was one night we went to a gay bar in San Francisco. I don't know if you came or not. And it was super fun when we were in business school. It was super fun, but that was like the last time. Anyway, so it's just, what do you say to yourself when you look in the mirror? And the answer isn't useful if it's, I'm a shell of my former self. Instead, the answer could be, I have a chance to be the best version of me for someone else today. What an opportunity. And that's a choice. That's the branding that I think we have to bring.
Becca Levy at Yale has shown that when we shift our mindset in midlife on aging from a negative to a positive, it gives us 7.5 years of additional life. So it is about, the glass is half full. What gets better as we get older? Because there are a lot of things that get better with age. What's something that you think that's gotten better in your life as you've gotten older?
I am able to do things that require patience dramatically better. I can't do things that require attention dramatically better, but I can be patient with everything from having to sit for 5 hours in a waiting room to doing a project that doesn't work right away. And my impatience used to be a superpower because I could spark something and make it go forward. Like in business school, the professor knew if he called on me, I was going to say something that was going to change what was going to happen next in the class. So shifting that has been interesting, but eagerly walking away from physical or mental things I can't do with joy has been a fine choice for me. I used to be able to drink a whole bottle of Matouk's hot sauce. I don't eat hot sauce anymore. It's just fine. It's fine. But if I have to just keep pretending, then I'm reminding myself all the time that my instrument isn't what it could have been.
And with time being a scarcer commodity as we get older, 10 years from now, what would you regret if you didn't learn it or do it now? Since anticipated regret is a form of wisdom.
Okay, this is interesting because I started the year because I had 3 projects last year and there was a lot of sprint toward the end. So I decided to start the year with a blank slate to see what would arise. And a 5-year project is a commitment when you only have 1 or 2 5-year projects in you, right? And I started the whole year with this mindset that time is scarce. And what I discovered is the opposite is true. I got more time than ever before. When I treat time as scarce, I wreck it. And if I treat time as precious, but I got a lot of it, then I can be patient and I can be present. When you talk to people who are nearly retired or retired, they'll tell you they got nothing but time. Time's not scarce. They got nothing to do. So if I'm in this liminal space between busier than anyone I know or, sitting on a rocking chair facing the wall, I might as well relish the fact that time isn't that scarce. What am I going to do with it?
So this is a beautiful segue into talking about retirement. Do you think you'll ever retire? And what does that mean to you? Is retirement a dirty word? My point of view on this is basically that retirement were the golden years, because if you were doing mind-numbing, back-breaking work for 40 years and you're 62 or 65 years old, you don't want to do that anymore. And you deserve to play golf and watch TV and start drinking martinis at noon. That's not our era. Our era of knowledge workers have crystallized intelligence and wisdom that goes off into their 70s. And therefore, for a lot of us, the idea of retiring means putting your brain on hold, because that's been your valuable asset to offer the world. And that doesn't make any sense. So what's your perspective personally on retirement, Seth? And if you expect that you'll never retire, does that mean you might curate your life differently, including the fact that you've said, I'm not going to be jumping on any planes?
If retirement means lonely and bored, I'm not interested. If retirement means that my day job isn't a job, then I've been angling toward that for a very long time. That I view my life as a series of art projects. And every once in a while, one of those art projects enables me to pay for the next art project. But if it doesn't, that's okay, because we live in this jackpot world where if some of your art projects work, you're okay. I know people who came up in the internet side with me who don't have to work again for the next 7 lifetimes. And they still show up at work with this grimace like they have to go to work because that's their fuel. And so pick your fuel and pick your future. And my fuel through discipline is I'm not going to pick it because it has a price tag. I'm going to pick it because it's generative and thrilling and I'm going to learn something. And I like to think of this as an art project. And if it doesn't succeed at what I set out to do, it's still art. And that's what I'm trying to seek out and create.
And you're not all worked up about legacy or, in the capital L legacy kind of way. Like, I want to be remembered for. If there's anything to be remembered for, it's how you've curated your life to have it be an art project and to be very generative. Would that be accurate?
Because I've been a teacher for so long, started when I was 17, the biggest wins for me are when someone I taught teaches somebody else something. That's my legacy. And that's why I don't keep track of how many books I sell, but I do keep track of who bought the book and what they did with them. So if I bump into someone like I did yesterday and they walk over very respectfully and say, someone gave me this and it really made a difference, I'm like, yeah, that's the point. I don't want to be recognized walking down the street, but I do want people to be in a culture where they learn something or taught something because I opened the door for them.
And what's exciting for you these days? I mean, is there something popping up in the Seth Godin world that is the next juicy art project?
I used to panic when I was between projects. I'm not panicking right now. One project that completely succeeded but is closed now because it ultimately didn't work. And then I did a book and I did a game. The game made me so happy. It competes with Wordle. It's called Bongo. And Bongo, I play it every day. It's being played by millions of people around the world. I loved making Bongo. I loved the way I was able to work with Hearst and not have to hire people. The book I did with Authors Equity, I was their first author. It was thrilling to work with that team and teach them what I know. And then the project that didn't work was a classic Seth Godin weird software game thing called Good Bids, where we invented a new way to raise money for charity. And the people I worked with were all delightful. And we knew going into it that there was an excellent chance it wasn't going to keep going because it was a heavy lift. So when I think about these art projects, I'm trying to come up with a blend of those things, a blend of good people doing interesting stuff that has a component of community, a component of learning, and a component of game, sort of all integrated together.
If you were to take those component parts, that Venn diagram you just described, and applied it to polarization in America as an art project, what might you do to address this incredibly fragile and painful time in the history of our country?
I think that many people in politics believe that the populace cares about policies and even basic principles. In fact, most people who are caught in this oppositional loop have just bought into opposition. That I want their half, whatever they're in favor of, I'm in favor of the opposite. And guess why that happened? It happened because very well-funded forces in this country and other countries, combined with a new form of social media, did it on purpose. In the small, around the table, people are not nearly as divided as others would like us to believe. And this too shall pass. While it's going on, we have to figure out how to minimize the trauma and minimize the real hurt and the breakage of things that are going to be very hard to fix. But it is incorrect to believe that 300 million people have had a thoughtful, focused sit down with all the issues and come to the conclusion that they are unalterably in favor of one thing or another, because I don't think that's the case.
So do you think smaller discussions with diverse groups of people make a difference then?
Oh, we know they make a difference. And the well-meaning people, regardless of what color hat they're wearing, well-meaning people are trying to do this at scale. The thing is, as soon as you say at scale, you've mostly undermined what you were trying to do. And, I was one of the early internet optimists, and I regret not raising a flag for all of the pitfalls that I've since seen Not that it would have made a difference, but it's not all happiness when you give everyone a microphone and you give people bonuses if they cause division to happen. But we're already seeing new generations coming along who grew up with this medium, who understand it differently and who are connecting differently and who are talking about things differently. And so the generational crisis we're in, and I know we're running out of time, but there's a book called The Fourth Turning that gave me great insight and also a little bit of optimism. There were only 15 years of the baby boom. You and I are the youngest baby boomers, but there are only 15 years of it. And we've had baby boomer presidents 30 years already. So we have taken over the culture, taken over music, taken over industry, taken over politics, and now we're dying. That vacuum is going to get filled. And it's not going to get filled by 54-year-olds. It's going to get filled by 40-year-olds. And that turning happens every 80 years, particularly every 20 years, but this big one every 80 years. And it's happening right before us. And again, I think what we need to do is hold each other's hands and get through the trauma and stay resilient, optimistic, and demand better. But the cycle is going to take us where it takes us.
Beautiful. Thank you. I do know that book. It's also it's a book that Steve Bannon, is a big proponent of, which means that anybody, I don't necessarily have the same politics with Steve Bannon, but I agree that it's a seminal book. Last question for you, Seth. Let's say someone 20 years younger than you, 30 years younger than you, comes up to you today and says, I'd love to tap into your wisdom, Seth Godin. I'd love to have lunch or coffee with you next week. Are you open to that? And when you come to our lunch or coffee, could you come with a bumper sticker of wisdom that has your wisdom fingerprints all over it? And what's the origin story? Because if our painful life lessons are the raw material for our future wisdom, often our wisdom came through the school of hard knocks. What might be that bumper sticker of wisdom? And
okay, so that's a 3-part question. Part number 1, buying the t-shirt at Disney World doesn't give you any future happiness. Having lunch with a hero is a dangerous and risky affair that I do not recommend. And so that's why I don't do it with people, because I can't possibly offer them a souvenir that's better than the thoughtful 30-year track record of stuff I built for them. Better to imagine you're having lunch with me, because then I'll probably meet your expectations. Number 2, sometimes there's wisdom on a bumper sticker, but if there is, it's not because of the bumper sticker. It's because of the way you treat the bumper sticker. So you don't need more information. You just need to decide. You just need to choose who to be and to do that and to do that and to do that. And there's no magic single sentence I can tell you that's going to change anything. All learning is self-learning, autodidactic. And my job, your job, is to create the conditions for people to teach themselves, not for us to teach them. There was a third part of the question, but I don't remember what it was.
It was the origin story.
Oh, the origin story. Yeah. Okay. So what makes somebody like, do I have a minute? Because I love my origin story.
Yeah, please.
Spider-Man's origin story is the radioactive spider. Superman's origin story is Kal-El saw the planet was going to explode. You get the idea. The reason that superheroes have origin stories is not because other things didn't happen to them. Lots of things happened to them. They went to middle school. They did this. They did this. They did this. The origin story is the origin story because we remind ourselves of it all the time. When you pick an origin story that you can remind yourself of, and it's useful and generative, good for you. If you pick an origin story that diminishes you, undermines you, demeans you, you made a mistake. Pick a different origin story. So the short version of my origin story is, when I was 14, my dad worked at a very big company. A guy on the board of the company in Buffalo said, will you come with me? I'm taking my new 30-foot motorboat from Buffalo to Detroit. And my dad hated big boats that were bigger than a rowboat. And he said, I can't go, but my son would be delighted. I was 14 years old. So they gave me $40 and I had a little sailor's cap, and we get on this boat, me and this guy, and Lake Erie is so big that when you're out there, you can't see the shore. It's like the ocean. It's like Gilligan's Island. It's so rocky. It's so wavy. I'm throwing up all over this guy's boat. He's furious at me for vomiting on the teak. And Finally, that night, we made it to Port Carling, Ontario, and I swear I'm never eating again until I get to dry land. Okay, fine. We sleep. The next day, we head out, and it's like glass. Lake Erie is perfect, and we're doing great. And dusk comes, and we see the lights of Detroit in the distance, and he runs out of gas. I got a plane ticket for 8 p.m. that night back to Buffalo. So 6 p.m., the Coast Guard comes, gives us some gasoline. He gets the thing running. And we head toward Detroit, and we get there, and it's not Detroit. It's Cleveland. He was lost, and we were in the wrong city. So now we're in Cleveland, and it's 9 o'clock at night. I've missed my plane. My parents have gone to the airport. I don't get off the plane. There are no cell phones. This guy takes me to a stranger at the local boat club and says, blah, blah, blah. And he comes back and says, this guy's going to take you to the Rapid. You'll be fine. So it turns out the Rapid is the name of the subway in Cleveland. So they dropped this 14-year-old kid at this inner city train stop at 10 o'clock on Sunday night, covered in vomit, and they dropped me there. So I get in the thing, and it turns out the subway goes to the airport. So I go to the airport. The only hotel that's got a van is the Hilton. I get in the van. I get to the hotel. It's 11 o'clock at night. I walk in and say to the guy, I'd like a room for the night. 14-year-old kid by himself, covered in vomit. He says, that'll be $38 in advance. That's all the money I got. I slap it on the table. I go to the room. I call home. I say to my mom, don't worry. I'm fine. I'm at the Hilton. I'll find out a way to get home tomorrow. Next morning, 6 a.m., the phone rings. It's my mother. She says, you're in Cleveland. I was like, yeah, I know I'm in Cleveland. Well, I hadn't told her I was in Cleveland. I just said I was in the Hilton. So she called every Hilton hotel in concentric circles around Detroit until she found me. My dad calls up the U.S. Air Club. They've got a ticket waiting for me. At 10 o'clock in the morning, I fly home to Buffalo. 11 o'clock in the morning, my mom picks me up at the airport. She gives me a warm welcome. She hands me a clean shirt. I said, what's this about? She says, you're not sick. You're going to school. That's my origin story.
Wow. Just, I love you, Seth Godin.
Thank you, Chip.
Oh
You're
my
the best.
God. You are too. Such a joy being with you. Thanks, everybody.
Go make a ruckus.
Thank you for watching the Midlife Chrysalis podcast.